For this initiative for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We started this initiative 5 years ago, and our mission really is to enhance the lives of individuals with differing abilities and their families and support them. So we work to train students, also professionals in the field, and educate our community, which is what these events and talks are really about. And so we're very pleased tonight to have Magen and Wendy Harris, who co-manage the Birth to 3 Early Intervention Program for King County. Both have worked in the field of early intervention for over 10 years, and both have children with disabilities. So they really have a heart for this area and for families. They understand kind of the stresses and challenges that go with this. So tonight they're going to talk to us a little bit about the transition from early intervention, specifically birth to 3, to different educational systems, especially public education.
Thanks. It's fun to be here, and thanks for coming out on a rainy night. So we'll tell you a little bit about ourselves, and then we're going to ask you for a little bit about yourselves, so we know who's here. So yes, I came to this work from the world of early learning, where I worked for years and years and years, and then worked as a special educator at Kindering for a number of years, and now work in your local government, trying to make our system better in lots of different ways. But how I ended up doing as a special educator really was because of my daughter, who came to me at 22 months old, my younger daughter. As a foster child, she was deaf and had cerebral palsy and a seizure disorder, and she probably taught me more than any single person has taught me in my whole life. She's 26 now. And so yeah, I come as a parent and have the wonderful chance to work with Megan, and we like to say that we're two sides of the same brain. We're the opposite sides.
That's true, we are. So I'm Magen Cromar, and I co-manage the Early Intervention Program with Wendy Harris at King County Developmental Disabilities Division. We have really similar paths in which we got here. I also started in early learning in the ECAP preschool system, then moved over into early intervention, did direct services with families for a bit, managed an early intervention program out in North Bend, and then came to King County. I have 2 children with developmental delays. One went through the early intervention system, the other one wasn't identified until he was older, and so now he's going through the school system and on an IEP. And so I really come to this work, I think, first with my parent hat on, and second with my provider and systems administrator hat on.
So who do we have here? If you also are a parent, or identify as having a disability yourself, or a family member with a disability, raise your hand. Okay. And so that's some of you. And if you have worked in early learning, or you currently work in early learning, yeah? Pretty much everybody. And how about the Birth to 3, Part C, early intervention system? Who's worked in that system? Okay, not very many. And how about 3 and up special education? Who's worked in that part? Okay, kind of lots of people. How about healthcare field? And mental health. Great, okay, and what else, what am I missing? Oh, child welfare system, anybody who comes from that arena? Not so much. Who did we miss? So today we're going to talk about transition, and so really, like all good educators, we're going to start with you and a transition that you experienced to help us shine a light. And so you're going to have to move around and talk to somebody. So everybody get a buddy that you don't know, hopefully. That way everybody might have to move. Can everybody get a buddy? And you don't have to say anything right away to this person. I want you to think about a transition, any transition that you experienced Right, you're going to introduce yourself and think about a transition that you experienced. You can tell what the transition was if it's something personal. You don't actually have to tell what the transition was. But I want you to think about what was most helpful to you in that process, what was least helpful to you in that process, okay? You can tell the story of the transition too if you want, but you don't have to. But do think about what was most helpful to you, what was least helpful to you. So thank your partner, and we'll keep on going.
So today we're going to hopefully cover what is transition. We'll go over the timelines, the purpose of transition, transition plans and how they work, the roles of families, birth to 3 providers from the early intervention system or from community-based providers, school districts, and community partners. We'll also talk a little bit about resources that you can share with families, hopefully not long lists, individual resources. And then we'll talk a little bit about partnerships and how we can improve partnerships. So what is transition? Transition is the process of moving out of early intervention services today for the purpose that we're presenting on, moving out of early intervention services and into the services, people, places, activities that would occur for a child after they were the age of 3. Transition is based on the individual needs of the child and family. Some children transition out of early intervention into something called Part B special education services, and some children don't qualify for Part B special education services, so they transition into other community-based programs. Some families qualify for Part B special education services and choose not to enroll their child in those services, and so they also would transition into just a community-based program, and we'll talk about all of those different scenarios today.
And while we're at it, even though we're using the term early intervention here, we also are really trying to creatively think about other names to call what Part C services are, because a lot of families, a lot of communities are really threatened by that term, early intervention services. It means a lot of different things. So today we'll use that term. We'll also use birth to 3 services or Part C services. And if you have a brilliant idea of what we should call those services that everybody else in the world calls early intervention, let us know.
So it's never too early to start talking about a transition. Someone mentioned that in our opening activity. Preparation for families is huge. So we really start from the time a child comes into early intervention services. We start talking to the family about the transition at age 3. We let them know that we're only going to be with the family from the time that the child enters up until their 3rd birthday. At least 6 months prior to the child turning 3, we really start to solidify talking about transition. The family would begin working with the family resource coordinator on scheduling a meeting to sit down with the local school district or sit down just with the family resource coordinator in their early intervention program to talk about what's coming next. If the child is potentially eligible for Part B special education services, the services that serve children between the ages of 3 to 5, at least 90 days before the child's 3rd birthday, they would hold a meeting with the early intervention program, the school district, and the family. Again, that's just if the family's interested in that service. The district would then need to determine if the child was eligible for their services through an evaluation process, and that would happen sometime between the 33 to 36 month time period. And then on a child's 3rd birthday, as long as that didn't fall during the summer months, the child would go ahead and start their Part B programming as long as they were found eligible. It's one of the huge perks of being enrolled in early intervention, and one of the reasons that we talk to our community partners about making sure that they refer families early. Early intervention is your only direct route into Part B special education services. We'll talk later on down the road about what to do if a family didn't make it into early intervention, but it is your only direct route and the only way that you'll start services on a child's 3rd birthday. So what's the purpose of a transition conference? We want to review information about the services that the child is currently receiving, either through early intervention or through community-based partners. We would talk about what the current individualized family service plan outcomes or goals are that the child's working on. We would identify transition activities or next steps for the family. We would develop a written transition plan that everybody would have, and then make sure that we've connected the family with their local school district and discuss other resources that are available to the family in their community. So what's a transition plan? This is the plan that identifies exactly what the family is going to do, what the family resource coordinator is going to do, what the early intervention team is going to do, and what the school district is going to do in order to prepare for that child turning 3 and moving out of the early intervention system. So what is the family's role in the transition process? The family's role is to really be open and talk to their early intervention provider about any concerns that they have, any questions that they have. Be willing to talk to the school district about concerns, questions that they have, and make sure that they get all of those answered. Share information about their child with the school district or other services that the child's moving on to. They need to give permission for their child to be evaluated. It's really important that families keep some sort of notebook if they have a child with special needs, so that they have a place that they've tracked any of the services that their child's received, any evaluations that their child's received, because that information is really useful when you start to talk about transitioning out of early intervention. So making sure that the family's kept a notebook, keeping scheduled appointments. This is really, really important. Early intervention is this really wonderful world where we hold families' hands, and if they miss appointments, it's okay, and we reschedule with them. School districts are running on a really tight timeline, and they have minimal staff. And so when they schedule an evaluation appointment, if you miss that appointment, it's possible that it's going to totally throw off the family's transition timeline. And possibly the child won't start services on their 3rd birthday because the school district then has an exceptional family circumstance for why they're not starting services on the child's 3rd birthday. So it's really important that families understand that part of their role is keeping all of the appointments related to transition. And if they can't keep the appointments, to make sure that they contact their early intervention provider or that they contact the school district to let them know that they need to reschedule. It's really important that the family
And I just want to say one thing about that, which is that when you think about families that might fall through the cracks, and we've talked with school districts about this, they're like, oh yeah, they didn't get back to us, so we're not serving that family. When you think if that family, when they're in birth to 3, like Megan was saying, the agency's going to follow up and really wants to make sure that the child gets services and that the family is well supported. And from the school district perspective, oh, that child didn't qualify. I guess they'll get back to us later. Or that family didn't follow through. Or families who are homeless, they're just not necessarily going to go the extra mile to make sure that the child gets served. So if you have contact with that family, either because you're working in birth to 3 or in some other system, really helping and supporting a family that needs some extra hand-holding to get connected with the school district is really worth it, because once they are connected and working and enrolled, then the school district views them really differently than a child who's not yet enrolled.
Absolutely. So who's on a transition team? We talked about families being on a transition team and a little bit about their role. But they also always have a family resource coordinator. Family resource coordinators are case managers in the early intervention system, and they're the people who brings the family together with the district or with any community partners to write the transition plan. So they're really the organizer. They would contact the school district, they would get all of the consent forms signed, they would share information about the child with the school district as long as they've received consent from the family. And they would be the people that would share information with the family about other community-based options if the child wasn't found eligible for Part B services. The local school district representatives are part of a child's transition plan as long as the family is interested in seeking those services. And they would collect information from the family that they needed in order to evaluate. They would describe the services that would potentially be available to the family. They would make sure that the family understood their parent rights under the Part B system, which are a little bit different than the early intervention system, and we'll talk about some of those differences in a little bit. And then every family has the opportunity to invite anyone who is important to them. And we actually really encourage families to invite grandparents, friends, other service providers that are involved in that child's life, child care providers. These are all people that have a lens on that child's growth and development, and they'll be able to offer up information during this transition process that will be useful to determining eligibility and useful for ongoing planning for the child and family.
Okay, so what we're going to do really quickly is ask you, we're going to go through some more slides and ask you to think about those slides from one of these 4 perspectives, okay? So we're just going to count off really quick so you know which perspective you're holding as you think about it. Then we'll do a little bit of work from that perspective. Great, thanks. Okay, so remember that number. So ones, as we move forward, you're thinking, you're being the family members, and their supporters. So you're thinking like a family member or a child care provider or a grandparent or a parent. Okay, that's what you ones are doing. Twos, you're thinking like a family resource coordinator. You're the person who works in early intervention who's helping the family get connected with the school district, right? You're having to deal with paperwork, etc. Threes, you're going to be service providers. You might be a therapist, a speech therapist, a motor therapist, educator, maybe even a healthcare provider who's been working with the child. Or you might be one who will receive the child. You might be the incoming preschool teacher, right? So think about that. You're thinking about being a service provider, and then a local school district representative. Okay, that's what you're thinking about. You're the person who's dealing with the paperwork on the other end, or what's happening with the other end. I want you, as we go through the next slides, to think about your perspective, whatever role you are, what you see as potential challenges to this process and opportunities. Okay, so you're trying to kind of get in the head of that role. Okay, great. And we'll come back.
So the transition conference, this is the actual meeting that happens between the family and the school district. It introduces the family to the school district. This is a time to review information about the child. Again, hopefully we have all the right people at the table who can offer up information about the child, including any current individualized family service plan outcomes that child and family are working on. We would identify the transition activities. So all of the activities that are going to happen between the time that meeting occurs, which is at least 90 days before the child's 3rd birthday and their 3rd birthday. We would develop a written transition plan so that everybody walked away with a document that showed all of the activities and the dates that we were going to make sure those were done by. We would talk about the special education evaluation process, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well, more in depth. And then discuss other resources that are available to the family and the community to start to make sure that we're preparing them for the fact that maybe their child's going to qualify for Part B special education services and maybe they won't. And so we want to make sure that families are thinking about, they're not putting all their eggs in that one basket, because that can be really disappointing. They're thinking about both options and making sure that they're prepared for either option when their child turns 3. So the evaluation process, it's really different for the Part B special education system than it is for the early intervention system. And so it's a brand new experience for most families. It's really a process of gathering information about the child's strengths and their educational needs. Everything in early intervention is focused on what the child and family need to be successful in their home setting. And now all of a sudden, all of the focus is on what the child needs to be successful in an education setting. And so that's really what that evaluation is focused around. The family will be provided with written consent before the evaluation happens. The next steps of the process is to review all of the records that have been gathered by the early intervention team, any records that the families brought, because hopefully they've kept a really nice notebook so that they can provide any previous evaluations or information about other services that the child's received. And then the school district would actually do the assessments for the family. They would do standardized assessments in the areas that they determined they needed to do them in. The process allows for the school district to determine whether or not the child will be found eligible. That's not something that the early intervention team is able to determine. It's really up to the school district to determine whether or not the child's found eligible for their individualized education program at age 3. The local school district would work with the early intervention team to, again, use our input, but ultimately they'll be the ones that decide. So an evaluation may include hearing and vision, and usually they would use the most recent hearing or vision screening that the child has had done. Health and medical history, they would want to look at when was the most recent well child visit, what medical reports does the family have that they can offer up to the school district to help use in that eligibility decision. This is another place that the family needs to keep all of that treatment notes in a notebook somewhere. Cognitive development, so the ability to think, to understand, to remember, to make sense of things. Adaptive development, their ability to have appropriate age-level skills in helping themselves dress, feeding, toileting, personal hygiene, all that taking off your clothes and putting it back on, doing things for yourself. Social and emotional development, the ability to maintain appropriate relationships, both with kids your same age, family members, teachers, important people in that child's life, and the ability to show age-appropriate emotional regulation skills. Communication development, and this is kind of two parts, the ability to use language and the ability to understand language. Physical development, both fine and gross, your smaller things, coloring, feeding yourself, and your bigger things, running, jumping. And another big difference between the Part B system, special education system, and the early intervention system is that in early intervention, kids can qualify off of either having a fine motor delay or a gross motor delay, or a expressive communication delay or a receptive communication delay. And in the school system, they lump those together into communication and motor. So it becomes harder to qualify. So eligibility for an individualized education program. The family will be part of the eligibility team, although again, it's the school district ultimately deciding eligibility. They would communicate with their local school district about all throughout the transition process, and they would receive a copy of the evaluation results, any evaluation reports that were written up. The family resource coordinator would follow up with the school district regarding eligibility. They often call the district the same day that the child has had an evaluation or within a couple of days to find out whether or not the child was found eligible so that they can relay that information back to the family. Some districts will tell the family the same day that they have an evaluation whether or not the child was found eligible, some don't. And then they would support transition services in whichever direction things were going. If the family was found eligible, they support those transition services. If they weren't, they would start to talk to the family about community-based services. The local school district would consider all the information supplied to them, the medical information, any previous evaluations, the individualized family service plan, and the actual standardized evaluations that they conducted. And then they would hold a meeting to talk to the family about eligibility and whether or not the child was found eligible. So differences in eligibility. I touched on this a little bit during the evaluation portion, but there are some big differences in eligibility. So we have a chunk of kids who are enrolled in early intervention all the way up until their 3rd birthday, but don't qualify for Part B special education services after the age of 3. And one of those reasons is that the eligibility changes. So in early intervention, we actually have 3 ways, only 2 are listed here, but we actually have 3 ways that families are found eligible. The first is that they show a 25% delay or a 1.5 standard deviation in any one area of development. And we evaluate all areas of development for every single child who's referred, not just areas of concern. Often families will be referred for communication, and then we find out that they have a self-help delay. And maybe they'll end up ultimately qualifying in self-help and not communication. Maybe they'll qualify in both. But it is a strength that we look at all areas. And the second way that a child can be found eligible is that they can have a diagnosed physical or mental condition that has a high probability of developmental delay. And this really can be any physician that's willing to write a letter saying, I've diagnosed this child with a condition with a high probability of developmental delay. We're able to use that letter to make the child automatically eligible for early intervention, regardless of whether they're showing the 25% delay or 1.5 standard deviation. And the idea behind this is that we make sure that we get kids in as early as possible and that we start providing them with services, especially if for some things, even Down syndrome, kiddos, infants might look typical. And we would want to make sure that we were there from day one providing services, not waiting until they were 4 months behind. The third way that kiddos are found eligible, and this is just for your information, is that we can use informed clinical opinion. So if we've done the standardized evaluation and they're not showing a delay significant enough to meet our eligibility criteria, if they don't have a diagnosed condition that has a high probability of developmental delay, but the team still feels that this child needs early intervention in order to grow and learn and develop, then they're able to bring the child in under informed clinical opinion. And I would say this happens most in the child welfare system. So, IDEA Part B. When kiddos turn 3 and they move into that system, they need to show a -2 standard deviation below the mean in 1 or more areas of development, or a 1.5 standard deviation below the mean in 2 or more areas of development. And so that is just a big enough jump that we do end up losing some families and that they aren't found eligible at the time that they're 3.
And one really important thing to notice about this is diagnosed condition doesn't apply here. And I have a friend who works as an OT doing evaluations for a school district. And she says frequently they do have kids coming through even with an autism diagnosis who may not be eligible for preschool of 3 to 5 because they don't have this, their scores aren't low enough. And you know, there's great things about that, yay, and there's not so great things about that. And also, but it is important to know that school districts don't advertise this, but they do have a little bit of, what do they call it, professional judgment, similar to informed clinical opinion. They actually can throw their weight, even if a child is not qualifying, if it seems like it's in the best interest of the child's development. It's not something that people talk about, but know that it's a possibility.
So even though identified conditions don't automatically make the child eligible, those are things that the district would take into consideration and that may sway them, even if the child isn't showing the 2 standard deviations below the mean. Because they're able to look at if a disability has an impact on that child's educational needs and child's learning, and that could sway them.
Yeah, and one of the areas that districts mostly do serve children is children who are deaf or hard of hearing, or I think also children with vision impairments who may not fall below, meet these criteria.
So there are a couple of different pathways after determination. If the child's found eligible, again, you would do your IEP planning, which we'll talk more about in a minute, your placement into the least restrictive environment that they'll be served in. The child would start services, and then within a year would have their annual review. If a child's not found eligible and everybody on the team agrees with that eligibility decision, they can be linked with community-based options and services. They can have a referral for evaluation if appropriate at a later date. Sometimes districts will say, check back in with us in 6 months or a year and let's talk about reevaluating the child. We know that sometimes kids exit out of early intervention and fall off that cliff into no therapy land. And they do start to backslide, and within 6 months they're found eligible for Part B services because now they are able to show a large enough delay. And then you can talk about if a child's possibly eligible for a 504 plan, and we're going to talk about the 504 plan a little bit more in depth in a minute. This plan can identify accommodations that might be needed by children who don't qualify for special education services. If a family disagrees with the decision that's been made, if the team disagrees, they can ask for an explanation of the evaluation from the school psychologist, and I would always encourage families to do that if they walked away really feeling like their child should have been found eligible. Make sure that they get all the information about the process that they need to hopefully move on to something else. And then they can ask for an independent evaluation. Sometimes families get their evaluation through the school district, and then they go get an independent evaluation that finds something a little bit different. And then the school district would take that independent evaluation into consideration. They won't necessarily make them eligible off of it, but they will take it into consideration. And again, with any family that's told to come back in 6 months, it's really important for them to understand that they're really going to be the ones that are going to have to initiate coming back in 6 months. It's highly unlikely that the school district's going to call them and say, hey, how's Sophie doing? Would you like to come back for an evaluation? Let us get you on our calendar. It's just probably not going to happen. So if a child is eligible, what happens next? So an individualized education program or plan is written, meeting is scheduled. The team would share ideas for goals. And while it is sharing ideas for goals, often when a family comes, some goals have been written and a family has say. It's not a blank document, but the team is sharing the ideas that they have for goals. Decisions are made about services and placement and location of services. The IEP is put into writing and it's signed by the district and by the family. And if not already done so at the eligibility determination, the family would be provided with consent forms for initial services before that IEP plan can be implemented. So now we're going to talk about some of the differences between an individualized family service plan, an IFSP plan, which is what you have when you're in the early intervention system, and an IEP, which is what you have in the 3 to 5 Part B special education system. So the IFSP is really focused on the child and family. The goal of early intervention is to help support the family so that they can support their child in their growth and development. Our focus is the whole family unit, not just that individual child. So we focus on making sure that the family gets services that they need to help them, again, enhance the development of their child. We often are including siblings, child care providers, whoever is important in that child and family's lives.
Oh, and I just was going to say, enhance the development, and that's across all developmental areas. It's not just the cognitive development or the educational development, and they're really thinking whole child when you're in early intervention, and whole being, you know, kind of how the early intervention providers and services are really designed to be holistically offered. And in fact, once you qualify for early intervention, the plan on an individual, the service plan doesn't have to relate to the area you qualified in. You might get services that aren't the area you qualified in. You're suddenly eligible for any of the 17 services that birth to 3 providers offer.
And then the IEP focus is really focused on the child and on what the child needs to be successful in an educational setting. And so this is really hard for families when they've gone from up to 3 years in this setting where everybody is focused on the whole family to the focus being on the individual child and only what they need to be successful in the education setting. This can be super frustrating when families are really struggling with something at home and the school district isn't able to provide supports to them to help address that issue.
And one example that we hear about often, so for example, a child who has sensory challenges and might have gotten support around that in early intervention, with the support of an occupational therapist to work through their sensory challenges and keep moving along on that. Once they enter the school district, sensory challenges might not be on an IEP at all. They might not show up at all on an IEP, and the OT might only be working on handwriting with a child, if that. So what the schools will fund as their services is in many ways way more limited.
So the IEP meeting and placement decisions. We're looking at the educational goals for the child, how goals will be measured, and how progress will be reported, what special education and related services will be provided to the child, what's needed, when services will begin, and how long they're going to continue. And again, they should begin on that child's 3rd birthday. And then where the services are actually going to be provided. I love this picture that I found on Google Images. Wouldn't it be nice if everyone who sat in on an IEP meeting had the best interests of the child at heart? And this is really what every family wants. I've been through several IEP meetings, and it's really hard to come and feel like you've got to bring your biggest mama bear self to get what your child needs in order for them to be successful at school. Ideally, everyone's working together and everyone's being cooperative. We really encourage families to resolve any sort of disagreements that they have directly with school staff, directly with administration, if it needs to go to that level. If there are still unresolved issues and they've tried working directly with the school staff, with administration, they have the option to use a formal dispute resolution process. And so it's good for families to know about that option if it's something that they need.
And I'll just say, I've had experience with my daughter. The IEP meetings were always like that because she had so many complex disabilities, and almost always I brought muffins or oranges or something to try and make everybody happy. And they're just always lasted longer, were more challenging and contentious, but pretty much by the end of the meeting I was willing to sign the IEP and moved on. And then, is the next slide on least restrictive environments? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll just say one more thing. And then, when she was moving to high school, she had always been kind of, she's a very involved, nonverbal, wonderful, lively, social human being, and they wanted to put her in a very low-functioning high school classroom where they had toddler toys and things like that, and that was where the district was assigning her. And I asked for her to be in a kind of a more, for her as a deaf teenager with cerebral palsy, it was kind of not the right environment. I know we're not talking about transitions, but I was just like, wait, what? All the children in this room are sleeping and or playing with toddler toys. And she must have been 15. So I actually did go to mediation with the school district. And it sounded like a terrible, scary process, but it actually wasn't so scary. I just got to name what my concerns were, and the district named their concerns, and she actually did end up getting to go into a less restrictive classroom. So it sounds like a scary, terrifying thing to use those dispute resolution processes, but it actually can help solve problems. They can be very positive.
Absolutely. So I love that real life example that Wendy gave of least restrictive environment. Least restrictive environment is the mandate that tells school districts that they need to ensure children are with their typically non-disabled peers at the school that they would attend if they themselves didn't have a disability. So your home school with your peers that are non-disabled to the maximum extent appropriate. So there's Every child has different needs, and there's a spectrum of how much time the child will spend with their non-disabled peers, but we need to make sure that to the maximum extent appropriate, that's where they're being served. Putting that IEP plan into action, the family and providers can ask questions and be open to new ideas. Families have to be open to lots of new ideas when they're moving out of early intervention and into the Part B special education system. New ideas about how the child's going to receive services, how they're going to get to those services, about who the child's going to be interacting with. For some of these families, their child hasn't been in a group setting before, and so they've got to be open to that idea about their child being capable of being in a group setting. Help staff at the new program understand the child. So there are lots of different tools that families can use to help staff get to know their child. There's a really great booklet you can make called All About Me. If you Google that, All About Me, Children with Special Health Care Needs, it's a booklet that families can fill out to teach their new providers about their child.
And I would just add to that, if you have a complex child, it's really, and you know a lot about your child, probably more than the school district is ever going to know, it's okay to say, I'd really like to do some training with you about how to meet the needs of my child in that setting. It's one of the things that I did every year with a new teacher or a new aide or whatever, because otherwise it just wasn't going to, she wasn't going to be able to teach them what she needed to be successful in the classroom.
So I think ensuring that there's really nice open communication between your early intervention team who served the child and the new school district team who's going to serve the child, because that early intervention team is going to have lots of tricks and ideas about how to ensure that this is a smooth transition process for this child. So just making sure that those people are connected, that they have each other's information so that they can talk back and forth prior to that transition happening.
So it's not the early intervention people who are going to make that happen. The parents have to make that happen.
Well, they would have to make sure that they've signed all of the correct consent forms. And I wouldn't say that happens across the board. So I do think it's good for families to advocate for that to happen. Some early intervention agencies are always at IEP meetings, always write reports that they make sure that the district gets. Some individual providers would always call to make sure that they've touched bases with that child's new service providers. But I think that's something that families should advocate for because it doesn't happen across the board. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say all early intervention providers would write an exit report describing the child, but they have different levels of useful description. I don't know how to say that, but yeah, it's so everybody writes an exit report. But it's not necessarily the most communicative. There can be different levels of communication in the handoff.
Right. And then making sure that you've helped that child prepare for transition. Wendy touched on helping kids getting ready to ride the bus. So there are some programs and families that would take the child on a city bus to help them get used to just that process of getting up onto a bus that's much bigger than a car that they've been in. Making sure that the child's had some opportunities, if they are moving on to a developmental preschool, that they've had some opportunities to be in a group setting, to be around other kids, to follow a group from one activity to the next. So things to help families remember, they're really the most important and constant presence in their child's life. And I think families need to be reminded of that over and over again. We are all people that come to help support them, but they're really the most important constant presence in that kiddo's life. They know their child better than anyone else. So we can do all the standardized evaluations in the world, and at the end of the day, the person that knows that child the best are the parents, caregivers, people that spend lots of time with that kiddo. We're really just getting snapshots. They can help their child grow, learn, and develop. So we focus a ton on this in early intervention. Like we talked about before, we're focusing on making sure that the families know that ultimately they're who's going to enhance their child's growth and development. But that needs to be reiterated to families as they leave early intervention as well, that even though your child's going to be going off either to speech therapy 1 hour a week or to developmental preschool, and you won't be there for all of the visits, you still have the ability to help your child grow, learn, and develop, and you should still be an active part in that.
And along with that, some children and families with children with complex needs, as we mentioned, the IEP might address services that relate to the educational setting. And I don't think I realized this as I was coming through. I was still going to have to get some additional therapies to really support my child. And so that's one of the things that families might not know. And it's just one of those things that, you know, some kids still need more than the school district provides. They're not going to provide everything your child needs because the focus is different than early intervention.
Again, it's on that educational setting. So the families are the experts, and they have so much to share, not just during this transition process, but ongoing, that really throughout their child's education, they're going to have the best outcomes if they're openly sharing and communicating with that child's team. So what are some options to consider if a child is not found eligible for Part B special education services? Some school districts, like Wendy mentioned earlier, Renton School District is one of those districts, like Washington, Bellevue, they have preschool programs that are for typically developing kiddos. And so families can enroll in their school district's preschool program. And they should talk to the school district about what other options their child might have through the district if they're not found eligible. We talked about the developmental preschools having typically developing peers. Sometimes if kids aren't found eligible for a developmental preschool, they can be brought into that classroom and still receive the benefits of being in that setting, but be a typically developing peer. Community early childhood programs such as Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program or ECAP, Head Start, those are really good options for kids leaving early intervention that don't qualify for school-based services. Community recreation programs, Parks and Recs have little preschools that they run, sometimes parent co-ops. Play and Learn through child care resources. If you don't know very much about Play and Learn groups, I encourage you to look that up and get some more information. There are these really great groups that are all over King County that families or caregivers can bring the kiddos to. They're a little more informal in that most you're not registering for, you just show up. There's other people from the community. They are facilitated. They're a really great first exposure for kiddos to group settings and a really great way for families to get out and meet other families in their community. And then library story times. Those are really, really great. Not all kids are successful in that setting, and so it's not for everybody, but it's a great, again, first option for families that want to do something outside of the house.
But by the way, just to plug Seattle Public Library, and I think some King County libraries are having sensory story times for kids who are, and so that would be something to check out for a kiddo who has challenged with sitting through story time.
Yep. And then what if a child is identified with developmental concerns after they're 3? Everything that we've talked about today is that process of moving into special education when you were in the early intervention system, but not all kids get referred to our system prior to their 3rd birthday, unfortunately. So if you come into contact with a family who has a child that's older than 3, or if the child is less than 45 days away from their 3rd birthday, then you would refer them to the Child Find system, which is the special education system of getting kids into their services, although it's very different than what we've talked about today. So you can just Google the school district's name, so Seattle Public Schools plus Child Find or whatever the school district is, and up would pop your Child Find contact, and you would make the referral to that person. The process from there is that the family would come in for a Child Find screening, not a full developmental evaluation for the most part, and then based on the screening, the district would decide whether or not they were going to evaluate. The timelines are really different when a child's going through the Child Find process. It can often take 6 months or more before a child would actually start services. So again, get them in prior to 3. And districts screen or evaluate, develop an IEP or 504 plan, provide services. You can still refer families that have kiddos that are actually in the school system. Sometimes kids start kindergarten and districts will sort of sit on them for a year, basically wait to see how things settle out. If a family is really concerned, or if you're really concerned about a kiddo, it's okay to ask the district to go ahead and evaluate instead of waiting to see how that year ends. How to refer to early intervention. So hopefully this is how all the kiddos are getting in prior to 3. You can call or fax the Within Reach Healthy Families hotline, and this is the phone number. Or you can refer directly to any of the King County early intervention providers. We don't have a single point of entry. Within Reach is our central point, but we don't have a single point. You can use this really great map tool. So if you click on this link, up would pop a map similar to your Google Maps that you drive with, and you would enter a family's address, and then you would get a list of the early intervention providers that serve that area of the county and the contact information for those providers. So some resources and supports. We told you that we would make sure that we provided you with these. For a family who has a child of any age with a developmental delay or disability, they can contact the ARC of King County. They've got multicultural information, referral information for African American, Latino, Somali, and Vietnamese. They have a really fabulous parent-to-parent program. Parent-to-parent is so great for families to get involved in because it's really nice. Somebody talked about being able to talk to somebody who's gone through a similar situation. This is what parent-to-parent does. They connect families with other families with a similar diagnosis, issue, aged child, in order for families to make sure that they have the support that they need. It's often the families that have gone through it before you that give you all the really great tips and tricks for your local school district.
Sure, and then another program that operates really throughout the area, Open Doors for Multicultural Families, also partners with families in helping them access resources. They have various kinds of family training, and they have family support specialists who speak multiple languages. It's a great program. This part, so we're involved in a lot of different partnerships across the county with a lot of different parts of the systems, with healthcare providers to improve referrals, with school districts to improve transitions, with child welfare system to improve referrals, with all different kinds of partners and players, with the mental health and infant mental health system. And we're always looking to improve our referrals, improve input from partners, so that the developmental evaluations, instead of just being a snapshot, or have more depth and really more resonate. You know, we're always doing a developmental evaluation on a day, sometimes in an hour and a half. But if you were working with a child or family and you have a video's worth instead of just a snapshot's worth of information, we'll make those developmental evaluations more thoughtful. Where both systems are interested in having participation of other partners and providers in developing individual family service plans or IEPs, depending on if the family invites you in. Of course, people are always welcome. And then we're always really seeking, how can we improve the warm handoff with each other? Like, how can we make a positive transition? So what I would love for you to do, your 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s, we'll just take a few minutes and we'll get you out of here a few minutes earlier. If I can get the 1s to meet down here, don't move yet, but I'll tell you that 2s can meet right over here. The 3s will meet back there, and the 4s will meet back there, okay? And what I want you to do is come together and talk about, we just heard about all different parts of the transition experience, the planning, the evaluation and eligibility determination, and the actually beginning of services. So what I'd love for you to do is talk from your perspective for just a few minutes about what being in that role might be like, and then we'll switch it up and we'll get you into a different group real quick. So this is going to be super quick.
Just super quick in closing, thank you so much for letting us come and talk to you today about this really important transition from early intervention into school-based or community-based services. Most of the slides today were taken from a curriculum that was put together by Early Supports for Infants and Toddlers, which is the state lead agency for early intervention in Washington. They have a family curriculum called Our Next Steps, which was similar to the name of our talk today. And this is a workbook that families can use to prepare themselves for the transition process. I brought 6 copies that people are more than welcome to take. And if you don't happen to get one of the 6 copies, if you just Google Our Next Steps, you can get the PDF to this online. And it's a really great resource to share with families. Thanks so much.